Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy, and I'm the co-founder and managing director of And Humanity, an inclusive content agency. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm very excited today to have Adeline, CEO and principal of The Commons, a diversity and inclusion strategy firm, and an advisor at And Humanity. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's very exciting.
Yes. Okay, so today we're talking with Adeline about backlash, when a brand tries to enter the diversity and inclusion space and basically being accused of exploiting and basically how to handle that and manage that if that happens. But before we begin and before we dive into it, I'd like to first acknowledge we operate on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Semiahmoo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. So thank you again, Adeline, for being here today. Let's start off with a little bit about yourself. So how did you get into this line of work? And why do you feel the work is so important?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like I've always been in this type of work. Like it was like social justice issues have always been a passion of mine. I think probably just starting out probably even before high school. I think partly because of it's just intersections with my own identities, growing up as a first generation Canadian, and my parents were both immigrants, refugees from Vietnam. They came over because of the war. So, you grow up in that context, and you grow up with an awareness of things like race and racism and class issues, and, because they did see like a kind of a downward in spiral in terms of their economic class leaving Vietnam, because they were quite well off, and then having to work and gain it all back here in Canada. And then I think it was something that I was always interested in, so I would volunteer in the area. I ended up doing a lot of work around supporting new immigrants, supporting youth, and then later on I came out as part of the LGBTQ community, and I think, and then I was sort of drawn to supporting those groups of people because I knew how it could be very difficult, especially for youth. And then, eventually I just ended up in this more sort of, I guess I can call it more working towards systemic change around equity, diversity, inclusion. And so I've been in this space for probably altogether probably around 15 years. Most of my working adult life I've done work in here, but in terms of just doing that really systemic work, working with organizations to support them, that works I've been doing probably that would be more like 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. And so I just found, and I was really happy when you reached out, because I haven't really worked specifically in the communications field, but the type of work I do is so agile, and it really pertains to any sector, any industry. So I'm really excited to sort of enter your space and have our spaces merge, actually.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you find a lot of the diversity and inclusion work when it comes to marketing and communications tends to be written by marketers. And I found it so fascinating speaking with you about it because it provided a different lens. So collaborating on just how that should look and what the proper practices are was really informative and I think very useful for our community, which is why we have you on today to talk a little bit about how that's useful and how we can, provide and share information that will help the community. So I'll dive straight into our first question, which is, there are definitely brands, big and small, who have tried to enter the space and have it go terribly wrong, complete backlash and accusation of the worst, which is exploitation. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on this? And can a brand come back from this?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about it more and more, obviously, since we started working together. And I'm sure it's one of the reasons why maybe more brands, more companies feel a little bit hesitant, coming into the space and starting to speak up around social justice issues. And I get it. It could be scary. It's a risk. It's not like you start a shoe company because you think you're going to be talking about race and racism, right? Exactly. Although some people might, right? Like we look at some companies and that's exactly what they do. Like Rihanna, right? Like she started her makeup company because she wanted to talk about the lack of race representation, right? And the lack of cover up and color, and like just the, you know, the lack of that sort of thinking and representation. So yes, some people do start like out from the
Yeah.
get-go. I would say
The
most
first
companies.
companies, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We need
So
to
yeah, exactly. And I'm not one to say like don't enter the space if you know, if you didn't start out, you know, with this in mind, because I think it's important, like, to really truly achieve equity in, you know, in the workplace. You know, everybody has to come on board, and everybody has to realize that it's an issue that you should be engaging with, because it's important to you, and it's important for the people that you work with, and it's important for, you know, your customers, your clients, and, you know, so absolutely, I feel like, you know, you should, there's a great business case why you should go in there, you know, in terms of, you know, increasing your market base and all that type of stuff. You know, but at the same time, you can't just go into it willy-nilly, you know what I mean? You can't just jump into the hot topic of the moment without really being intentional and thinking it through. And I always advise, you know, any company at the very beginning to do it really thoughtfully and come up with a plan and anticipate backlash. I think that's one of the major things, is to anticipate that you're not going to get the best response from everyone, and that's okay, you know. And so, you know, I could speak more on that a little bit, but I think that'll kind of come out as we talk about it a little bit more. But it's always best to, if possible, the issue you decide to kind of jump into, to start, you know, making some space for, and to start, like, you know, elevating in terms of your own communications. Um, you know, at the so ideally it should be something that your company's already involved in and passionate about, and there's a story in there that you can share from a personal level. And if there isn't, and there isn't always, then at the very least, you know, do your homework, you know, talk to people. Like, there's this saying, like, nothing about us without us.
Mhm.
So whatever issue you want to tackle, whatever issue you feel like, you know, like, I've got the whatever, the brand power to actually really contribute to this conversation, then consult first. Talk to the people that is impacted by, like, the most by the issue, whether it's racism or homophobia or transphobia, whatever it is, sexism, misogyny, you know, do your research. And people say that the best thing that you can do is to use your resources and to make space, you know, for the people with the stories to come forward with them, right? And so there's a lot that you can do as a company.
Mhm.
um, and yeah, and I mean, and there's definitely some best practices around, okay, well, how do I respond, you
Mhm.
know, when I'm being accused of woke washing or whatever, you know, like, or, you know, or accused of yeah, you know, appropriation or whatever, right? Like, so, and
Mhm. Before we dive into that, because we will,
mhm,
um, how do you know that the positive will outweigh the negative when it
mhm,
comes to, you know, entering space, making a mistake, and then
yeah,
and to back to the one of the questions I had is, can a brand come back from that?
mhm, mhm,
You've spoken about, you know, the redemption factor
mhm.
as well. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and that is a good question. I mean, I think there, if you look at the numbers, and there's, like, you know, I won't speak to it in any length during this interview, but there's definitely a strong business case, you
Mhm.
know, for diversity and inclusion. There really is, if you even want to look at it in terms of the bottom line. So I think that in itself might be enough for companies to be like, yeah, okay, I want to get in on this. But obviously it's not enough. So let's hope that's not the only motivation. And you know, but even if it is, and then they jump in without looking really, you know, without doing the consultation, without doing the intentionality and the plan and everything like that, and, you know, and then the backlash happens. Like, I think we can think of lots of examples. Then yeah, I feel like there's not like a script or a checklist you can follow, but I think there's a couple of tried and true, you know, things or values that you can maybe follow. And one of them would definitely be take a step back and take the time to listen. Okay, so where's this negative feedback coming from? And just to truly understand what your part was in it. And as an example, there was a case of Barnes and Noble, the very large, book company. I think a lot, like book selling company. I think bookstores, whatever, across probably the world. I think a lot of people know about them. I think during Black History Month, they thought they were doing a good thing. And decided that, what they would do is they would create new covers for these classics, what we call classics, like part of the canon, like mostly European classics, right? So we're talking about like Pride and Prejudice and Tom Sawyer or whatever, these types of classic books that we had to read in high school, Shakespeare and all that type of stuff. And they decided, well, what we'll do, because it's Black History Month, is we'll make new covers for them and we'll just put Black characters on them. So we'll reimagine them as, stories like Black stories. Except the only thing is they're not Black stories, like, because they did nothing else except change the covers. So, they're being accused of literary blackface and things like that, because the stories are still from the white gaze. The main characters are white. The writers are white. Like it's an European like perspective and aesthetic, and they did nothing to change that.
Yeah.
So obviously it was an issue. And, there's a lot of people who had things to say and wrote articles about it. And essentially what, they were told they should have done is just like take the opportunity to showcase Black writers, because there's so many Black writers. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're not considered classics or part of the canon because of things like marginalization and racism and being kept out of that, right? Like being told their stories don't matter. So that's a great opportunity to showcase, no need for blackface. Just actually get Black authors in there and showcase them, right? So, So I think that's a good example of, if they took the time to listen, maybe if they had actual Black writers in the room when they were coming up with this great idea, this campaign, they probably would have gone there, let's just say. So I think representation matters, especially, in the decision-making room. So that's a huge one for mitigating risks, is have the people from the communities and who are impacted by the issues you're trying to tackle in the room making the decisions.
Yeah. Okay, so in the case of Barnes and Noble, what would you suggest that they do? They've made the mistake, it's out there, they have backlash.
Right.
You've talked about in the past about how sometimes making a mistake is actually a greader opportunity to apologize and win back the community. Can you speak a little bit about that and what they could have done and how they could have maybe won back the community in some ways?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think one thing would have been to like gather up and read and listen to all the criticisms, and make sure they then like start consulting and getting those people in the room, like I was talking about at the beginning, and get the Black writers and publishers and into the room, and then make sure that. And then when you draft your apology, because I think this should be apology or an acknowledgement at the very least of what they did and the potential harm, that happened, and put out an apology, but have it really like straightforward and backed up with an action. I think that's like even more important in some ways than the right wording for an apology or an acknowledgement is the next step. Mm-hmm. Then what? What am I going to do now? Mm-hmm. So am I going to now instead take, the rest of the Black History Month, and not just Black History Month, but like make it part of, Barnes and Noble's, plan to continue to showcase writers of color, like mm-hmm. Black writers, but also other writers of color, other marginalized colors, other marginalized writers, mm-hmm. And not just over 1 month, not mm-hmm. just in February when it's Black History Month, but all the time. And, start really encouraging, publishing companies to publish stories that are not often heard, and be that place and that forum, like to have these stories accessible, right? To make them accessible to the larger public, mm-hmm. or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So not just an empty apology, but
Mm,
actual action and change, right?
mm, mm. Do you have an example of an organization that has done very well doing the apology, like made a mistake,
Mm.
apologized, you know?
It made the change. Yeah. There's definitely I think examples out there. I think maybe one that comes to mind, or I don't know if there was like, or this one's not so much one where there was an apology needed exactly, but it was like one of those, like, it was a miss when it could have been a hit.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the example I'm thinking of is, and you might know of some too, and you might have to remind me, and maybe it's just like falling out of my head or whatever. But I'm thinking of like just like P&G. Like, I know that they've been more and more trying to put out ad campaigns that kind of want to contribute to a conversation like around social justice and things like that. And I think they initially they had a campaign. And from my understanding, it was around, it was called, it was like, it was about being a better man or something like that. Because I think
Oh, I see.
for Gillette,
Mm.
because I think the slogan for Gillette is something about the best a man can be or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they played with it a little bit. And I don't really recall, or something about being a better man, and it was speaking to, I think, the Me Too movement and misogyny and things like that. But I think it just came across a bit heavy-handed, and people going, it's a shaving company, like, like,
Mhm.
is it the right forum for this conversation around toxic masculinity and things like that? And I mean, there was some positive feedback, like, oh, at least they're contributing and they've got this like big platform, and at least they're putting it out there. But it was a mixed reaction basically. And
Mhm.
then, but good for them, they didn't back off and be like, oh, we're never gonna talk about
Yeah.
this again. They just kind of came at it at a different angle, but still focused on like men and what it means to be masculine, and things like that, and a critique of toxic masculinity, which makes sense for their product too.
Mhm.
And I think what they did was, they just refined their message, I think. Because
Mhm.
then they had one where they depicted a trans man,
That's
or
it.
in a real and this is maybe the difference in this ad, is because they actually worked with somebody who was from the community who was a trans man.
Mhm.
And I believe the other person in the commercial was also actually his father too.
Mhm.
And it was a great story around, the first shave for a trans
Mhm.
man,
Mhm.
after, taking like testosterone, starting to grow facial hair, and then a conversation with his father, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who had raised somebody he thought was a girl, but it wasn't. And that was very touching. And I think they've done other things too around like conversations around race,
Mhm.
and they're getting there. And the thing is too, it's like the idea where you might get it wrong the first time and there might be some backlash, but it doesn't mean that you should stop. It should mean that you should stop and look and see what went wrong, take the good advice, engage with the communities that are impacted and involved, learn from it, pivot, but still keep going, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
So I think that was a pretty good
No, that's a
example.
fantastic example of, a brand that made a mistake, trying to
Mhm.
to relate to the community, probably didn't do as much, you know, uh, reach out to the community as much as they should.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
second time around, actually did a bit more uh,
Mhm.
of a thoughtful process and really won, really did
Mhm.
well in the community. There was another example that you spoke about that brand that Target picked
Oh,
up.
yes, right.
There was a bit of a backlash there, and
Yeah.
but it didn't come out exactly horribly. Can you?
No, yeah, it ended up being a different type of backlash, where it wasn't a backlash. Like, sometimes the backlash comes from, the communities whose story is being told, and
Mhm,
those you really, really want to listen to.
mhm,
And then sometimes backlash, though, comes from people who feel somehow threatened or don't agree with your politics or your message, or, yeah, somehow their identity feels threatened somehow.
mhm,
And those you should listen to too, but doesn't mean that your messaging is wrong. It
mhm,
just means that, not everyone's going to agree. And, but it's important. And there's a conversation around it's important to stand by your values, right? Because I think it was a case of different values. And the case you were talking about was Target during, this was also a thing for Black History Month. There's a lot of things that happen in Black History Month in the States. They wanted to showcase their sort of their entrepreneurial like products or whatever. And particularly Black entrepreneurs, just to show some representation and role modeling and things like that. So there's one particular company called Honey Pot that was started by a Black woman. It was a feminine hygiene line of products. And so it was a great commercial, and she talked about her story and how she thought it was important to be part of it, this campaign as a role model, because young Black girls don't often see themselves as entrepreneurs, reflected back to them. And this is great. And how she developed the product in a way for other Black women, because she was finding she wasn't finding products as working for her, and things like that. And then the backlash came from mostly white women who were saying, well, this is exclusion and this is racist, or reverse racism, or what about I didn't realize, I used to buy her products, but I didn't realize they were made for Black women, so they must not be made for me because I'm not a Black woman, just things like that didn't really, I don't know, so they were back. But in the end, so she got there was a lot of online negative feedback. And then what happened was Target still supported her and put out a statement and said, no, this representation is important, and it doesn't mean that you have less, or, that we're not also representing you. It's not about kicking you basically off the playing field. It's like making it bigger, so that we could all be there together. And then, what happened was people noticed the negative feedback and said, no, this is a positive thing she's doing. And so they encouraged each other to write really positive product reviews for Honey Pot, which people did. And then not only that, it gained so much attention, especially on social media, that people were I wasn't even aware of this product, and it's great, and I'm going to support her, And so in that case, it ended up being actually good publicity, right, for the brand and for Honey Pot, but also for Target, right? And Target stood by their campaign around Black History Month and the entrepreneurs that they were featuring. So that was really positive. So, but that's another type of backlash you might get. And that type of backlash actually could be a barometer for how successful you are, actually getting your message out. Because social justice is almost always controversial, right? And you're never going to get people to always agree. So even if you get that negative feedback, it actually could be a good thing and could actually be telling you that you're doing something right.
And in this case, I think that they actually saw increase in sales and saw increase in exposure, organic exposure, which was fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. How would you prepare for the potential backlash? Would you prompt apology in advance, or how do you prepare for something like that?
Yeah, I definitely would not prepare a statement in advance, because it would come across as really general and not sincere. But basically, you would want to have the people around you who are good at preparing, the wordsmiths and things like that. But then I would not rush to put out a statement, and I would take the time to maybe sit back a little bit and listen to the people and listen to what is being said out there, and actually go out and consult with some experts in the field, subject matter experts or whatever. And because I think you want to when you do put out your statement, you want to include what you did, right? To respond to, right? To respond to the harm, to make reparations, or if you want to call it a reconciliation, right? You want to include that, I think, in your statement. And then I think the next part is the most important part, which is the action part. What are you going to do differently? And how will you move forward from there? And I don't think it's about then going, no, we're just going to put out, communications and ads that are super safe all the time. That's not the point of that. The point is to still take the risk, but to, learn from your mistakes, right? And that can actually gain you more loyalty from people, because they could see that, you know, you're humble in your response, you actually made the necessary changes, and you're moving forward, you know. So I never fear like backlash, to tell you the truth, because it is learning, right? It's a way to grow, and you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
And if it's a sort of backlash like honeypot, then you just go, thank you. Thanks for the publicity.
And I think it's partly that, like you mentioned previously to me, that backlash is an opportunity to show that you're actually there. It's part of your values, and you're standing up for it, and you make mistakes. Makes a brand human. And
Yes, exactly.
people are looking for humanity in that. So, not to plug humanity, but yeah. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share that you think would be helpful for our listeners?
I think, I just want to again thank you for the opportunity to speak on these issues. Like, obviously, equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice is something that I'm very passionate about, and I just hope that everybody like steps into the space, because I think it's just so important. It is where we're evolving into. Workplace culture is often reflected in everything you do, including your brand, your communications, everything. So I say just make it a part of your DNA, and it's never too late to start. And feel free to reach out to you or me. And we'd be so happy to support people in this work. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's, I think your passion obviously comes through, having worked with you for a while now, and it's very exciting to work with someone who has so much heart in what they do. So I really appreciate that. But before I let you go, we always have we call it a final question, which is generally, what are you grateful for?
What am I grateful for? Well, that's a very interesting question during this time, you know. And I was actually I've been thinking about it a little bit more since, there's a pandemic and we've been inside, and trying to prepare for the new normal. And I realize I'm very grateful for like so many things, but especially I think for family at this point in time, especially because we're only allowed to see family right now.
Yes.
And so, I'm grateful that even during this really difficult time, that the whole world is I know we've heard this a lot, that we're kind of in it together, even though, maybe we're in different boats, but we're facing the same storm. And I'm grateful that, that I know that we're going to make it through. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, surreal, what we're going through. I think not many people, just 6 months ago would have ever thought anything like this would happen. It feels like it's straight out of a movie, of course.
Yeah.
But I personally am really grateful for, having this time, like obviously horrible circumstances, but having this time with my son and with my husband, while working full time, and babysitting full time is one of the hardest challenges I'll ever go through. I'm sure you know how that feels.
I think they should they should pay childcare workers more money. Now I know, if I knew I had to spend so much time with my kid, I don't even know. Just kidding, it's not true.
No. But yeah, I think oftentimes we underestimate how much work it takes to take care of a child, especially one that's almost 2, which again,
Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to find some time for yourself, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy with, obviously your home life as well. So where can people find you?
Where can people find me? Well, I am preparing to launch a website really, really soon. And once it should be any matter of time now. And the URL will be, if you just look up thecommonsconsulting.com, you'll find me. That's probably the best way. And if you're really, really stretched and have no other way to figure out how to get a hold of me, you can maybe get in touch with Andy. Tammy doesn't mind that.
By all means, I'm happy to forward anybody who wants to get in touch with Adeline. She's fantastic to work with. So please do.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I should give you my email address or something like that. But
yeah, I'll post it as well
yeah.
as contact so that people
Okay.
can you.
That'll be perfect.
And you as listeners, if you have any questions that aren't answered or that you want to be answered, please reach out. If you're interested in joining our community, either to collaborate or to even work with us, please do let us know. You can find us at andhumanity.ca. And we really hope to hear from you. We're always open for a chat or a talk. So thank you. Thanks again, Adeline.
Bye-bye.